We would be capable of saying to the Middle East, we frankly don't care what you do. The Chinese have a big problem because you ain't going to have any oil. But we would not have to be directly engaged. It's a very different question. But first of all, you got to set the stage, I think, here to not be afraid of what might happen in the region. Second, we clearly should have our allies, this is an old-fashioned word, we should have our allies covertly helping destroy the Assad regime. There are plenty of Arab-speaking groups that would be quite happy. There are lots of weapons available in the Middle East. And I agree with Senator Santorum's point. This is an administration which, as long as you're America's enemy, you're safe. You know, the only people you got to worry about is if you're an American ally.
Governor?
I agree with both these gentlemen. It's very interesting that you're seeing on the Republican platform a very strong commitment to say we're going to say no to Iran. It's unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And Rick is absolutely right. Syria is their key ally. It's their only ally in the Arab world. It is also their route to the sea. Syria provides a shadow over Lebanon. Syria is providing the armament of Hezbollah in Lebanon that, of course, threatens Israel, our friend and ally. We have very bad news that's come from the Middle East over the past several months, a lot of it in part because of the feckless leadership of our president. But one little piece of good news, and that is the key ally of Iran, Syria, has a leader that's in real trouble. And we got to grab a hold of that like it's the best thing we've ever seen. There's things that we're having a hard time getting our hands around, like what's happening in Egypt. But in Syria, with Assad in trouble, we need to communicate to the Alawites, his friends, his ethnic group, to say, look, you have a future if you'll abandon that guy Assad. We need to work with Saudi Arabia and with Turkey to say, you guys, provide the kind of weaponry that's needed to help the rebels inside Syria. This is a critical time for us. If we can turn Syria and Lebanon away from Iran, we finally have the capacity to get Iran to pull back, and we can, at that point, with crippling sanctions and a very clear statement that military action is an action that will be taken if they pursue nuclear weaponry, that can change the course of world history.
Let's try to get another question.
John.
Congressman, quickly, please.
No, I get a minute. Real quickly. You know, I've tried the moral argument, I've tried the constitutional argument on these issues, and they don't go so well. But there's an economic argument as well. Matter of fact, Al-Qaeda's had a plan to bog us down in the Middle East and bankrupt this country. That's exactly what they're doing. We've spent $4 trillion of debt in the last 10 years being bogged down in the Middle East. The neoconservatives who now want us to be in Syria, want us to go to Iran and have another war. And we don't have the money. We're already, today, gasoline hit $6 a gallon in Florida, and we don't have the money. So I don't believe I'm going to get the conversion on the moral and the constitutional arguments in the near future, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to win this argument for economic reasons. Just remember when the Soviets left. They left not because we had to fight them, they left because they bankrupted this country, and we better wake up, because that is what we're doing here. We're destroying our currency, and we have a financial crisis on our hands.
Let's take another question from our audience, please. Identify yourself and ask your question.
I'm Marcia Crossman from Scottsdale, Arizona. What is your stand on education reform and the No Child Left Behind Act?
This came up a bit earlier in the debate. Some of you mentioned it in a general way. Senator Santorum, to you first specifically. What do you do about No Child Left Behind today if you're president?
Well, you know what? I supported No Child Left Behind. I supported it. It was the principal priority of President Bush. To try to take on a failing education system and try to impose some sort of testing regime that would be able to quantify how well we're doing with respect to education. I have to admit, I voted for that. It was against the principles I believed in, but you know, when you're part of the team, sometimes you take one for the team, for the leader, and I made a mistake. You know, politics is a team sport, folks. And sometimes you gotta rally together and do something. And in this case, you know, I thought testing was, and finding out how bad the problem wasn't a bad idea. What was a bad idea was all the money that was put out there, and that, in fact, was a huge problem. I admit the mistake, and I will not make that mistake again. You have someone who is committed. Look, I'm a homeschooling father of 7. I know the importance of customized education for our children. I know the importance of parental control of education. I know the importance of local control of education. And having gone through that experience of the federal government involvement, not only do I believe the federal government should get out of the education business, I think the state government should start to get out of the education business and put it back to the state, to the local, and into the community.
Governor Romney, you were a governor. You had to deal with this law, so weigh in. And as you do, it's designed, like it or not, to help the public school system, which has struggled. Senator Santorum just the other day called public schools in this country factories.
Well, I'm not going to comment on that unless you'd like to. With regards to your question, I came into a state where Republicans and Democrats had worked, before I got there, to make some very important changes. They said that they were going to test our kids every year. They said to graduate from high school, you're going to have to pass an exam in English and math. I was the first governor that had to enforce that provision. There were a lot of people that said, oh, no, 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 let people graduate even if they can't pass that exam. I enforced it. We fought it. It was hard to do. We added more school choice. My legislature tried to say no more charter schools. I vetoed that. We overturned that. With school choice, testing our kids, giving our best teachers opportunities for advancement. These kinds of principles drove our schools to be pretty successful. As a matter of fact, there are 4 measures on which the federal government looks at schools state by state. And my state's #1 of all 50 states in all 4 of those measures, 4th and 8th graders in English and math. Those principles, testing our kids, excellent curriculum, superb teachers, and school choice, those are the answers to help our schools. And with regards to No Child Left Behind, the right answer there, this President Bush stood up and said, you know what, the teachers' unions don't want school choice. I want school choice to see who's succeeding and failing. He was right to fight for that. There are things that should be changed in the law, but we have to stand up to the federal teachers' unions and put the kids first and the unions behind.
Mr. Speaker, on that point, this is a conversation about what is the proper role of the federal government in the education issue. To the point the governor just raised about teachers' unions, you have complimented President Obama to a degree on that issue, saying he had some courage to stand up to the teachers' union. You went on tour with Al Sharpton and this president's education secretary in support of the multi-billion-dollar Race to the Top program that is essentially, I think they use stimulus money for it, but incentives to states, to schools that perform and that enact reforms.
What we did is we went around, including Tucson in this state, and we talked about the importance of charter schools, which was the one area where I thought the president did, in fact, show some courage, being willing to go into Philadelphia or into Baltimore or in a variety of places and advocate. We were in Montgomery, Alabama, for example, and say charter schools are an important step in the right direction. There are 2 things wrong with the president's approach, and the reason I would, frankly, dramatically shrink the Federal Department of Education down to doing nothing but research, return all the power under the 10th Amendment back to the states. And I agree with Rick's point. I would urge the states then to return most of that power back to the local communities, and I'd urge the local communities to return most of the power back to the parents. I mean, I think the fact is we bought over the last 50 years 3 huge mistakes. We bought the mistake that the teachers' unions actually cared about the kids. It's increasingly clear they care about protecting bad teachers. And if you look at LA Unified, it is almost criminal what we do to the poorest children in America, entrapping them into places. No Nation Left Behind said if a foreign power did this to our children, we declared an act of war because they're doing so much damage. The second thing we bought into was the whole school of education theory that you don't have to learn. You have to learn about how you would learn. So when you finish learning about how you learn, you have self-esteem because you're told you have self-esteem, even if you can't read the word self-esteem. And the third thing we bought, which Rick alluded to, which is really important, we bought this notion that you could have Carnegie units and you could have state standards and you could have a curriculum everybody living. Every child is unique. Every teacher is unique. Teaching is a missionary vocation. When you bureaucratize it, you kill it. We need a fundamental rethinking from the ground up.
Congressman Paul.
Newt's going in the right direction, but not far enough. The Constitution is very, very clear. There's no authority for the federal government to be involved in education. There's no prohibition in the Constitution for the states to be involved in education. That's not a bad position, and we can sort things out. But once again, the senators was for No Child Left Behind, but now he's running for president. Now he's running to repeal No Child Left Behind once again. But and he calls this a team sport. He has to go along to get along, and that's the way the team plays. But that's what the problem is with Washington. That's what's been going on for so long. So I don't accept that form of government. I understand it. That is the way it works. You were with the majority, you were the whip, and you organized and got these votes all passed. But I think the obligation of all of us should be the oath of office. We should take, and it shouldn't be the oath to the party. I'm sorry about that. But it isn't the oath to the party. It's the oath to our office to obey the law, and the law is the Constitution.
Gentlemen, thank you. One more break. When we come back, the final question of what could be the final Republican debate. Welcome back to the Mesa Arts Center, our Arizona Republican presidential debate. The four contenders on stage tonight. Gentlemen, our time is short, so one last question. 9 states have voted so far. We talked a bit earlier about the volatility in the race. The people of Arizona vote Tuesday, Michigan on Tuesday, Wyoming and Washington State, then Super Tuesday. Beyond that, 14 states over the next 10 days or so. Republican voters are clearly having a hard time. I want to close with this question. Help the voters who still have questions about you. What is the biggest misconception about you in the public debate right now? Congressman Paul, we'll start with you, sir.
I would say the perpetuation of the myth by the media that I can't win. And and the totally ignoring some statistics that showed it to be the opposite. Just recently there was a poll in Iowa, and it matched all the 4 of us up against Obama. And guess what? I did the very best. So I would say that is the biggest myth. But let me tell you, though, in public perception is one thing, but when you go around and talk to the American people and we have our rallies, that misconception isn't there. And I think that's the biggest misconception that I have to deal with. Mr. Speaker?
I think that the fact is that the American public are really desperate to find somebody who can solve real problems. I think that's why it's been going up and down and why you've had all sorts of different folks as front runners. And all I can say is that my background of having actually worked with President Reagan, then having been Speaker, if there was one thing I wish the American people could know about me, it would be the amount of work it took to get to welfare reform, a balanced budget, a 4.2% unemployment rate, and that you've got to have somebody who can actually get it done in Washington, not just describe it on the campaign trail.
Governor Romney?
We've got to restore America's promise in this country, where people know that with hard work and education that they're going to be secure and prosperous and that their kids will have a brighter future than they've had. For that to happen, we're going to have dramatic fundamental change in Washington, D.C. We're going to have to create more jobs, have less debt, and shrink the size of government. I'm the only person in this race.
Is there a misconception about you? The question is a misconception.
A lack of, you get to ask the questions you want. I get to give the answers I want. And,
fair enough.
And I believe that there's a whole question about what do we need as the person that should be president? What's their position on this issue? Who can be the toughest going after Obama? But what we really need, in my opinion, is to say who can lead the country through the kind of fundamental change we have in front of us. And we have people here who all have different backgrounds. I spent 25 years in the private sector. I worked in business. I worked in helping turn around the Olympics. I worked in helping lead a state. I believe that kind of background and skill is what's essential to restore the American promise. If people think there's something else in my background that's more important, they don't want to vote for me, that's their right. But I believe I have the passion, the commitment, and the skill to turn America around, and I believe that's what's needed.
Senator Santorum.
I think the thing I've heard from the very beginning, can you defeat Barack Obama? And if you want to look at the people on the stage, we're going to be running against a president who's going to have the national media behind him. He's going to have more money, a lot more money, because he isn't having to spend a penny in the primary. So he's going to outspend whoever it is, and he's going to have the national media on its side. Maybe you'd want a candidate who's not going to be able to win an election by beating the tar out of his opponent, spending 4 and 5 to 1 in order to win an election in a state, but actually can run a campaign based on issues and ideas and a vision that's positive for America, be able to be outspent and yet cut through because you have a strong vision, you have principles and convictions. that is going to convince the American public that you're on their side in making a big difference in our country and keeping us safe and prosperous. So we're looking for I think people are, they're looking for someone who can do a lot with a little, run a campaign on a shoestring and win a bunch of